everyone, to another episode of the Jim Carrey Project. I'm your host, Brian Kondrach.
And I'm Carrie Grant.
And we're here talking about Jim Carrey's movie career. We're starting with this first one, going throughout his entire career to see where he is today. Today we just finished watching Finders Keepers. It is a 1984 release date. It was directed by Richard Lester. Sandra Marsh, Terrence Marsh were producers, and it was written by Charles Dennis, Ronnie Graham, Terrence Marsh, starring Michael O'Keefe, Beverly D'Angelo, David Wayne, Ed Lauter, Brian Dennehy, Pamela Stevenson, Louis Gossett Jr., and Jim Carrey is somewhere in there as well.
He's a little further down on the list on this one.
Yeah, for sure. It's 1984. Had a budget of $7 million and box office of $1.4 million. So, not too bad. So anyway,
they didn't make a lot of money.
Let's go ahead and get started on this. It was a movie.
It was a movie
with Jim Carrey in it.
Yes, and you said like it was CBS theatrical, so we think it was in the movie theaters.
Yeah, and it had a theatrical release.
Yes.
And it was distributed by Warner Brothers, so it had a CBS theatrical film. So it definitely got released into films in the 80s, or into theaters in the 80s.
Yeah.
It had a pretty strong cast, I think, from that time period.
Yeah.
Beverly D'Angelo, who we all know from Christmas Vacation and National
a lot of
Lampoon's
other
Vacation.
ones. Yeah.
Michael O'Keefe, the star, was from Caddyshack, so we
Right.
knew that one.
Good 80s.
Brian Dennehy,
films.
We've seen in a bunch of things since the 80s.
Yeah.
Namely, the thing I remember him most from is I think he was the dad in Tommy Boy.
Okay.
So
I can see that.
Yeah,
yes. It's been a while since I've seen that, but yes, that seems right.
Chris Farley's dad. Farley's dad in Tommy Boy. So. It was a pretty funny 1980s comedy.
Totally,
It got a 5.5 out of 10 on IMDb.
Oh,
and a
really?
2.8
compared to the other ones we've seen, though, man, I feel like it was way better.
Yeah.
It was just much better done.
Yeah.
I mean, you could tell it was like a professional movie.
This one, I
$7
think,
million budget.
had a lot of random things happen in it, just like comedy bits. People in the 80s, the comedy of movies in the 80s is a little bit different than the comedy we're used to. Of course, now they're trying to do like, what it would be so funny if like she just carried a bag that we never saw anything, or if she got like, who is this random woman calling everybody fags? Like, that was definitely some of the comedy that was
some prop humor,
80s.
which is like different, and some like little slapstick a bit, and
unexpected twists that you're like, wait, where did that come from?
Totally.
That's the funny thing about it.
Totally.
So,
and we've talked about that with the other films a little bit, about how the 80s comedy had a different feel than what we have now. I feel like they did it even better than the ones we've seen, but this is probably, more writing, more editing, more people's eyes on it to kind of say, really that isn't funny, let's change it or whatever. Because I feel like the 80s comedy that we saw and some of the other ones they were trying it, but they were failing a lot. There. But I felt like this did a good job of being funny still, even though it was a different type of humor.
This is definitely getting in there where it's the mid-80s comedies that we all know and love.
Right.
Looks like some of the writers have definitely done other film and television, most of it.
Interesting to see what they've done.
Yeah. I'm not going to go through there right now. Cover Girl is something by one of the writers.
Okay.
Finders Keepers, of course. I'm not going to go through that list right
Yeah.
now. We can look around that later and figure it out. So let's talk about Jim Carrey's acting in this movie.
Okay, there's not much to talk about.
There is not.
This might be a short episode.
Very much. It's an hour and 35 minutes of a movie. Jim Carrey showed up at 1:04.
Right.
1 hour and 4 minutes.
Yes.
And he shows up as basically a straight character. No silliness to him except being just a nitwit, kind of an idiot.
Yeah.
But he plays it off pretty well. He's a
Would you call that a straight character?
For as silly and crazy as some of the other characters were,
that's true.
I think it's definitely a straight character. He's he's a kid who deserted the military.
Yeah.
He's hiding out.
I guess
in
you're right.
Small town USA.
But he's just dumb.
He's just an idiot.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
He thinks that he's
okay. I'll go with that.
He doesn't realize that he's the reason for his own problems.
Right. I mean, if you think about it, like literally every character in the whole movie though is
Kind of an idiot.
Yeah. Well, they're not. I wouldn't call it. I always think of a straight character as being like this kind of maybe I'm wrong, but like the serious one with all the other ones being silly. Yeah. Everyone in this movie is silly in their own way, like in different ways.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're all caricatures of whodunit kind of.
Yeah, that's totally what it is.
Who's the bad guy and who's the heist movie? Like we start off with the bad guy and the woman who's the daughter of the millionaire who steal the money and are trying to get away with it.
Who's just in love and just wants to like be the bad girl, and then
we don't have much development with that relationship except that it's like,
they're never together because he keeps sending her away.
Yeah. Given the chance, I think he would definitely have disappeared with the money without even thinking twice about her and the woman in it.
Yeah, and I think that's clear in it. Yeah, but then like the main character, is it Michael O'Keefe? You know, he's sort of the con man, but not completely a con man, still kind of lovable, and so you kind of have that weirdness where he starts with the roller derby team. A little bit of a rogue. Yeah, and then I love Beverly D'Angelo's character in it, where she's admitted that she's going through
she's found him. He found her right in the middle of a emotional breakdown. That's what it was. And psychotic
so it kind of explains why she's just crazy and weird the whole time. And then there's like the inept detective, and then there's actually the detective who seems kind of okay, but does a couple weird things like shaving. And
the FBI agent.
Yeah.
It's like, what would you be doing on a train while you're seeking out these suspects?
Yeah.
I gotta look presentable, so I'm gonna hang out in shame.
Totally, like that's. I mean, I would call him a straight character almost, except that like they threw a couple funny things in for him, like
what
that.
What do you do with that one?
But so when Jim Carrey comes along, we've seen over an hour of like all of these crazy characters. So you're right, when you see him, even though he kind of comes across as like an idiot, you're like, well, he
fits very well into the particular environment in which he's been thrown into. Right. Reading about this a little bit, I kind of assumed that he was going to have a bigger part in it, where once they get to small town, wherever it was, High River, Nebraska, middle of nowhere, I really thought that he was going to be attached to the money or the coffin a lot more than he was.
Right.
Spoilers. He's playing the character that is supposed to be the dead body in the coffin.
Right.
But I also thought he was going to have a lot more. I thought there were going to be a lot more hands on the money that everyone was trying to get than there were, and maybe they had to cut that out or something. But with Jim Carrey, we saw him spying
because he knew about the money. Yeah,
he knew about it. So I was really hoping that he was going to get his hands on it.
You're right.
And now there was going to be a weird relationship between the con man, the Beverly D'Angelo, the bad guys, and then Jim Carrey.
Sure.
But it was just
could have been on the editing room floor. It could be because it does make sense because they did kind of jump at the end a little bit to like. He found out about the money. He told his uncle, but then his uncle gets arrested. They get arrested almost right after that. So it makes sense that they might have thought about using them more in that plot.
It's just too long of a movie all of a sudden. It's like cut it and throw it away.
Yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah.
So
his character was cute. It was Jim Carrey again. He was funny and
a nitwit farm boy.
Yeah.
And he's got the big goofy grin for it. He can play that character, which I think is just probably him. Basically playing himself, like without the like wild zaniness that usually comes.
It was like it probably was hard for him. It's more of a toned down version of what he had done before. At least what we've seen and what we know he does afterwards. It's a toned down version of it. So hopefully that's not too difficult for him. But I bet this was a big. It was probably a big break and exciting for him to be like in a movie. Because as far as we know, or as we've watched, at least this is the first one that would have been in theaters, correct?
Yeah, this is definitely the first theatrical release that Jim Carrey is in, where it's out and it has a large budget. I mean, this had a $7 million budget, and
for the 80s, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a huge amount.
And really big names, and
the box art is impressive. You can't really look at it right there. I'll pull it up later.
Totally looks like one of those covers.
But it is the 1980s, post Caddyshack. I think that was earlier. It has all of the makes of a classic 80s comedy.
Totally. I enjoyed it.
Where it's like, yeah, it was fun, it was silly. Spent most of the time on a train, which is forced close quarters, which is always good comedy.
That's true.
It's mistaken identities,
a lot of that,
and it's just a heist.
Yeah,
in a way.
And who's going to take advantage of who, and like who's like going to do the back channels and doing something sneaky. And
when we finally meet the con man. Century, we're like, oh, he's gonna con everybody and steal the money.
Well,
kind of, but
he kind of did.
Yeah.
I mean, that I would say, and there wasn't a huge twist in that. When he showed up, we both knew that, and that is more or less what happened at the end, as he had the money.
We both knew he's gonna.
He was
end
just
up
being
with
nice
it.
and gave some away. But
He doesn't have to. He could have kept driving into the sunset.
Yeah,
with the house
but it's good because
on the car.
Yeah, because the friendship they said that he had with Michael O'Keefe's character. Did you? You were you got up for a few seconds. I don't know if you missed that. That Michael O'Keefe was at an orphanage. Did you hear that part? Okay.
Yeah,
and that Century had gone to that orphanage, but that had sort of not adopted him, but befriended him.
Yeah, he was
the
wise old black man that took him under his wing to teach him how to be a con man, which is
that never happens in movies either.
No, never, especially not in the 80s or any of the 90s or any of the 2000s. So I saw that, and it was real fun to see that parental figure hanging out with Michael O'Keefe and them trying to con kind of each other with when they were playing cards, but then them having a good relationship where it was fun. And it's like, okay, we know he's got the sleight of hand, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. I think it was a good movie. It definitely was about a 5-ish when it comes to what the rating is as a movie in itself.
Right.
There's really not a whole lot to talk about when it comes to Jim Carrey.
No, I wish there was more.
I know,
but
right?
I felt excited for him because I felt like this would have been a good, I said, a good break for him and something, kind of that next step of now he's in theaters and that's good. And he was in the openings, they had his name on it. It was one of the last ones, but it was
still there.
In there.
He played a vital role in the story.
Yeah, for sure.
But I don't know if we even necessarily needed to see him as a character. I guess you kind of do need him. We know that he does exist, but if you had hid him away from the audience's perspective or view, it could have been a reveal at the end that he's he was a real guy.
That's true. You could have rewritten it that way.
Everyone else was scamming based on.
Then
this
we wouldn't
guy
have watched it though.
I know, right?
He wouldn't have been big enough for us to watch this movie. So
never would have seen it.
I mean, was there? Did you find anything odd or uncomfortable in the movie?
I mean, there was a bunch of stuff that, going back to the 1980s, the humor is definitely a little bit more risque, a little bit different than what we consider now. The use of the word fag left and right
was
for
crazy.
Everyone, not only the use of the word fag and calling people fags and being scared of it, but then the bit parts where they had the construction guy or the choir teacher or people in the train were all being oh be that, do that,
portrayed as
gay or homosexual.
Yeah. So that must have been a thing.
I don't think it was the early,
where it was people were talking about it as in people I felt maybe before it wasn't as people just sort of ignored it. But now they talked about it, but then they also used that word, which I felt I guess we think of it as being derogatory now, but maybe at the time it wasn't as.
I think it was still a little bit derogatory, and it kind of has the feeling of what Mel Brooks does in Blazing Saddles with the N-word, which I'm not going to say that one, but the way they use it was so common language back then in the 70s and everything that Mel Brooks uses it in a way that is both tactful and hilarious at the same time. Where in the 80s, and especially in the early 80s, this is the beginning of, I would think, the AIDS epidemic. Using the word fag was just as funny to them as the N-word was earlier in that one. But it's those are still two very different words and two very different things, senses of humor. Yeah. But that was the 80s. That's what it was.
Yeah, it was interesting to see it used so
I would be
much.
I would be
and
interested
referenced so much.
I would be interested to talk to the three writers and be like what was it that was funny about that, and like why did you use this particular language, and like what do you regret using it? Do you think it could have been a little bit more tactful, or do you think that's just what the comedy was at the time?
I think that must have been it.
Yeah.
You know, they must have thought, well, this is funny. This is what people like right now. You know, and maybe it was, and you know, it's just we've changed so much since then. But that was like once or twice that then. I was like, well, okay, it's the 80s, but then they used it quite a bit, at least within a certain period of time.
Yeah, right at the beginning of the movie, I think they set it up, and then at the end, where it was all the individual people and the characters doing it. There was a lot of incompetence in this show, or in this movie. Why was the hotel clerk vacuuming the walls at one point? I don't know. Why?
Because it's funny.
Why the police chief of small town High River, Nebraska, never marry a Lithuanian woman. He's got a black eye. So domestic violence is a joke in this one. Undeveloped mental states is a joke about the cousin or niece or whatever it is of Brian Dennehy's character, thinking that Jim Carrey is actually dead. Yeah.
I like those little slapstick funny things that they throw in. I think it makes you pay attention a little bit more and listen. Bit. Yeah. Because I feel like, again, we kind of generally knew where the plot was going. So, like, having little jokes that are just different. Like, you don't see them now as much anymore. So I kind of enjoy that.
I'm curious, thinking back on it now, like, what's going to happen? Are the roller derby girls from the very beginning, are they all just... They're SOL, like they don't have anything. Yeah. He's got all this money. Is he going to go back and try and help them out?
Sequel!
I know, right?
Let's write the sequel.
We've got a sequel for it. The con man feels bad about it.
Yeah, we got to know what happens to those roller girls. Yeah.
There's and the police chief at the beginning with the
like they kind of brought it back once. Yeah, that's true.
We just find out who he is based on who this report was.
There's so many good characters you could still like develop more out of this. That could be really funny.
It was a silly, fun movie.
Yeah.
Did not make very much money.
No.
Which is unfortunate.
I wonder why.
I just don't think it was like, what did you think of the movie?
Interesting to see what came out around the same time as that one, like around the the 2 or 3 months before and after, and like compare that.
Oh. Looks like the filming was supposed to be 9 weeks, was finished in 6. They did Calgary, Calgary, Canada, and then all the little towns.
Cool.
It was it had a total. It made 865,000 its first weekend in 753 theaters, and then a total gross of 1.4 million. Reception and reviews. It was based on the book, the second to last train ride. It's a crazy, quirky comedy from director Lester that starts slowly and warms up to provide some funny moments. I think that basically.
There was some slow. It felt like it dragged for a while. Yeah, like there wasn't enough happening. Like that whole train ride, there was quite a long period where things were happening.
When you take it again from the book part, there's a car that's like doing fucking laps around the neighborhood.
Oh,
can you hear
sure.
it? I can hear it. So like, if you could take it from like it was adapted from a book.
Okay. Cool.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on in the thing. So this movie was adapted from the book, The Second to Last Train Ride. So I don't think it was an exact, of course it's not going to be the exact version of it, but it's definitely a lot of fun. It's a crazy, quirky comedy from director Lester that starts slowly and warms up to provide some funny moments.
Yeah, it does.
It's just exactly what it felt like it was.
And like we said, it was kind of it felt slow and like dragged out a little bit at certain points on the train, but for the most part, they did a pretty good job of keeping the jokes coming and adding new characters in when they got to like the new places and stuff.
And then there was some really fun bits with the final big chase scene of wrestling for the money.
Actually, really
where
funny.
they're on this unexpectedly moving house.
Yeah.
They're like, all right, let's move the house from here to there.
And they can't stop it. It's gonna keep hitting things.
Instead of stopping it and getting out, the truck driver bails out and completely runs away. But like the setup for the setup of that house and the reward of seeing the house get ripped apart because of a archway, and it was so much fun. And then the whole fight scene was pretty fun. Like I kept thinking the guy was Ed Lauder. I kept thinking I had seen him in a bunch of stuff. I thought he looks like one of the guys who played James Bond, and I cannot think of which one. He was also in that movie with Fran Dresser, but I can't think of his name right now.
He has that old
Is the mustache.
That mustache gave him that sort of old Hollywood look. But yeah, I definitely have seen him. I saw like a lot of these people were very familiar. Sometimes I don't always know their names, but definitely like big names maybe at the time, but also people who have really continued to work
doing a lot of other
since
things.
the 80s.
Yeah,
you know?
And it's incredible that I was thinking about that earlier, where it's like looking at the poster and looking at the cast list. This is not one of those movies like we've seen with the other three so far, where it's like Jim Carrey's in it. Let's change all of the marketing.
And we know, but then there's like nobody else you've ever heard of or we've ever done anything that we've seen since then.
So
where this was like we recognize cast, everybody.
Can't do anything else. You're like, all right, well, we also have professional production and distribution.
Yeah. Which is not true of like even just general 80s movies. If you think about some of those movies, like there's a lot of actors that were big names in the 80s that you just don't see at all anymore, where these people we still have within at least the last 10 years.
Judge Reinhold is one of them from like, that was that 80s? That was late 80s with Beverly Hills Cop and all that stuff. Like he was huge in the 80s and then he kind of fell off. Beverly D'Angelo got to play, I mean, she was been doing The Vacation in the series. I think the last one was the Las Vegas Vacation, which was late 90s, or actually I think that was 2000s.
It's probably early 2000s maybe.
I'm trying to, Ed Lauder was the one I recognized him from, is The Rocketeer, where he was the bad guy in that one. Communists or Nazis or whatever it was.
He has that look, doesn't he?
It's fun that they weren't able to rebrand this for Jim Carrey.
No, they couldn't
because of the strong cast.
Exactly.
I'm a big fan. I think it was a fun movie. I think it's definitely seen Jim Carrey come into the bigger realm that we will soon see him in. I know the next couple of movies that we're gonna be watching are some much bigger films. We've got Once Bitten is gonna be his next movie that we watch, which is his. He is like in the movie the whole time as kind of a straight character. He's a guy in it that is just a normal like high school kid, and you know he's dealing with vampires and stuff, so it's a little silly, but overall it's like
I'd like to see him in a serious character
all the way through. He's like the same normal character, which is fun.
Cool.
And then Peggy Sue Got Married is another supporting. Deadpool is another thing, but then after that we are pushing into all of his classics.
Does it say Earth Girls Were Easy? He's the alien.
He's just an alien. They don't. I don't know if they even had names in that. We'll talk about that when we get there.
I jumped ahead.
So yeah.
Okay, you rank it first this time.
Yeah. So for Jim Carrey's part in it, I will give him a 6.5.
Okay.
Because he played just a nitwit straight character, and he did a good job of it.
Okay.
We didn't see I think he probably had maybe 10 lines in the whole movie.
Yeah, it wasn't much.
It was not a whole lot to mess with. It was not like, look at this Jim Carrey movie where like he had a lot more stuff in Introducing Janet, or Rubberface, whatever you want to call it. He played a much larger role in that. But he is working with a bunch more high profile people in this show, which is great. So we're going to see him take the lead in the next movie, and it's going to be fun. So 6.5 for Jim Carrey, 5 for the movie.
Okay.
It was a 5. It was a middle ground 80s comedy.
Yeah.
That's like, cool.
Okay. So I will go higher, I think, on this one, because I feel like this is what I think would happen. I think Jim Carrey did what he was supposed to do in the thing. I don't think he was supposed to be Jim Carrey.
Right.
And I think, so for his role, like I'd say he probably did exactly what they wanted him to do. So I'd say he's like a good 8.
Oh, nice.
And then for the movie, so I'm going to rank it in 80s terms, like like of the other 80s movies I've seen. I would say 8.
You'd give this an 8?
I liked it. I really
fun.
liked it. And like, if I think about and I compare it to the other 80s movies that I enjoy, I enjoyed it just as much or more than a lot of those.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, nowadays sometimes plots and stuff are better, but
Yeah.
like for that time period, I'd say it was a good movie. I kind of am sad it didn't do better. But
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
It was definitely a comedy, and they hit a lot of really good parts about it. So I
Yeah.
think it was fun.
Would you say that this was a screwball comedy?
I wouldn't go so far as to say a screwball comedy. I would say it's mistaken identity and a heist, a caper. Yeah, it's not a whodunit, but it's like a heisty kind of comedy.
It's a bit of yeah. I mean it. I think it edged on screwball a couple times, and you didn't see all of it, but like
they could have leaned
they had
into
some
it.
bits of it that could be considered that, but yeah, I think it was a hodgepodge of.
The concept for the film, for Marsh's and Lester's concept for the film, was a story that was an ensemble cast rather than a star vehicle, which I don't know
like
if everyone
that.
agreed on that one, but I
Well.
think it was good.
Well, that's what I liked about it. I liked that it had a lot of different interesting characters in it and was funny.
This was Terrence Marsh's wanted to make his directorial debut, but understood the project would have a better chance
He
with
wrote
an
it,
experienced director. Yeah, so he hired somebody else to direct it. So
That
I think it
probably
was
the
fun.
right call. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good movie. It was a fun, entertaining afternoon of watching a 1983
Very
movie, Finders Keeper, film poster by Mort Drucker. I think he might have done a bunch of those things in the 80s.
They all look the same
They
to
all
me.
do.
Yes.
I'm going to go
They have that
research a
same
little
vibe.
bit about that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for hanging out and watching the Jim Carrey Project today. The next movie or next episode that we're going to be watching, I said, is Once Bitten, which of course is Jim Carrey as a lead role for the entire movie. So it's a lot of fun. I've seen it before, so I'm looking forward to seeing it again. Thanks again to Corbin Russell for doing our sound today. We appreciate you guys coming by. Check out our other videos. And we'll see you next time. I'm Brian Kondrach.
And Carrie Grant.
And this is Carried Away. This is the Jim Carrey Project.
We're getting carried
We're
away.
getting
now.
carried away. Yeah.
I'm always carried away.
Oh my goodness. All right. We'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.